Alrighty, so to get this same design onto this shirt without making it a patch, I'm going to actually stitch this design on the shirt. I'll show you what I'm going to do. First, I've prepared the fabrics that I'm going to be using in advance, which is just an ironing of it to make sure that it's not completely a wrinkle box. I'm just using some scrap orange as the background, and then I'm going to use this Auburn tiger print as the main feature fabric, where in this case you have the camouflage fabric. Okay, and now that I have that pressed out a little, I've got my shirt folded in half, and I always fold it in half and give myself a crease down the center so that I'll be able to center it in the hoop, because it's just one design, one character, and it's going to be centered in the hoop. So I want to make sure that my shirt is centered. Okay. Now I want the design to be 3 inches below the collar. So thankfully I've got some measurings on here so I could go, that's 1, 2, 3. I want the top of the design to be right here, which is actually right where this little V actually ends on the shirt itself. And so I know that my design is 6.5 inches tall. So I'm going to count down another approximately 3.25 inches so that I could find the center point where the design would be at. So let me move that to a beginning line. So I've got 1, 2, 3. That's about 3.5. So I'm going to say that's about 3.25 right there. I'm going to put a pin here just so I'll know where it's at. Okay, and then I'm going to get my hoop and I'm going to score my hoop so that I'll know exactly where my center point will be at on here. Okay, and just like with my other designs where I scored the hoop, I'm just going to draw a line there, and I'm going to draw a line here. And if this is on something that the ink would be a issue with, use chalk. Okay, use the fabric chalk because it'll wash out. Now I've got my center point right here, and I know that that is the design is going to stitch where this is the top of the design and this is the bottom of the design. So I'm going to take the shirt where I had that pin. I'm going to take that pin and I'm going to flip it a little bit here, put that pin right here in the center so that I have it where it's supposed to be at. And I've got a crease in there as well. So while I'm centering it, I want to make sure that the crease that's going up and down is going up and down this line as well. Okay. And let me get that in there. And I don't use the spray on. I've got a couple of hoops that just look terrible from the spray on. And I pretty much float everything and pin it down. Once I get everything pinned down, however, I will remove this center pin. So I will go through now and I'm just going to pin this shirt completely down to the hoop, and I will be back. Okay, I have it all pinned down. And now I just want to do some extra pinning to get the rest of the shirt out of the way, because you don't want it to flip down into the stitch area and end up getting pulled in with the design while it's stitching, and it will completely ruin your project. So some people tape this to keep it out of the way. I'm just going to pin it here in a few places, actually, not just right here. But that will help me keep it out of the way so that I don't have to worry about it falling into the stitch area. And I'll do that in a few points. Let's see here. I'll pin it up here. And I know I am fading in and out as far as my voice on the microphone. I have a bad habit of turning my head while I'm talking and not talking directly into the microphone. I will probably end up having to get a different type of microphone because of that very thing. The art of making videos. It's a talent that I guess you either develop and get well at or you don't. So we'll see what happens. Get that pinned down a little bit better. And I think that'll go. There you go. That's in there. This is a lot easier, I would imagine, on a multi-needle or a single arm, embroidery machine versus the flatbed. But once I upgrade, I will let you all know. And I do know some people who have multi-needles with the free arm who still use their flatbed, so I don't feel bad. But let's get this pinned in. Okay, so we've got the area that it's going to be stitching in pinned up, pinned down, and clear. I'm going to take this pin out. That's just a little indentation. It's not a tear or anything. I don't know how that looked on camera. So I'm going to take this over to the embroidery machine, get it hooked up, and we'll get to stitching. Okay, so we've got the shirt on the hoop and it's hooked up to the embroidery machine. The design is already uploaded. The needle is already threaded. I am going to lower the pressure foot. The light is green, so that means we are ready to go. And I will pay close attention to ensure that all of this is out of the way. What it's going to do first is stitch the placement stitch. If you saw the video where I made the other K just as a patch, you remember I stitched everything over the felt. I didn't do a placement on the stabilizer. This is going to give me a placement line first. Then I'll place the background fabric. It'll give me another stitch. Okay, so I'll show you. Yeah, it's going to be real close because it's a big K. And this is a 6x10 hoop. And I know you can barely see the thread because I'm using a blue thread on top of a blue fabric. And that is really cutting it close there. Okay, so the placement line is there now so that I can put the background fabric down, which is the orange fabric that I'll be using. And I'm just going to slide this out a little bit. I'm not going to take it completely off. I could have pressed this a little bit better, I think. But I just want to make sure that the fabric is going over the area it needs to be going over. Now, if it makes you feel more comfortable, take this all the way out of the hoop. Pin it down so that it's actually secured a little bit better. But I'm just going to hold it down and pray that I don't get my fingers caught up. And it's going to trace over the same exact stitch route. I hope my head wasn't in the way. And at that point, that would be why somebody would pin it down to make sure that it doesn't bunch up. It truly is not advised that you put your fingers in the embroidery field when it's stitching. I think I've said before, I know a few people who have had needles go through their fingers, and that's something that you really don't want to have happen. Okay, so now the tack down stitch for the background fabric is there. I am going to take this off of the machine. I'm actually going to wiggle it a little bit to make sure. Which way am I going here? Okay. I've got all the bulk of it up at the top, so I'm going to do that. Bring it around. And then, what am I caught on? You'll be able to see where I've got the stitching at. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take this back to the table and I'm going to trim all the way around this, okay? Okay, so I am in the process of trimming around the main the background fabric, I should say. And I did go through and I readjusted the pins so that the shirt was a little better out of the way. The last thing I want to do is have all of the work done and then it gets down to the final stitch, which is that satin stitch, and have it all caught up into the shirt. So just to be safe, I did cut that, I pinned that out of the way. And so I'm just using some applique scissors and I'm going through now and I'm trimming around the edges of the fabric. This particular design has a nice thicker satin stitch. Some digitizers, the satin stitches aren't as thick, so you always want to get as close as possible without actually cutting into the fabric, okay? But with this particular design, I'll be a little safe if I have some fabric showing, like those fuzzy edges right there. That'll be fine. The satin stitch is going to cover that up. And that's one reason it's always nice to do a test stitch to see how that design is going to pan out. You'll know exactly what you're working with and what you should and should not be doing as far as adjustments with your trimming and whatnot. So I am almost done with this and I will see you back at the machine. Okay, before I get to the machine, I just want to add one note. With the edges, when you're doing an applique, if you find that your fabric tends to fray a lot, don't hesitate using some fray stop or fray check just to be sure that your design doesn't unravel in the wash. It shouldn't, most fabrics don't, but I'm just realizing with this fabric that it's a little thin and it unravels. So I am going to go through this particular fabric and go through the edges with some fray check just to be sure that I'm not going to have a design done in vain, okay? And it doesn't take a whole lot. It'll dry fairly clear. And I may not hit every spot, but I want to get most of it just to be sure that it's not going to unravel. And I do apologize for all that pausing in my sentence, but I did it again, didn't I? Oh, darn, I give up. I'm not one of those people who can walk and chew gum, okay? And I was trying not to say that, but I'm one of those people. Just let me do it and show it. But alrighty, so the fray check is on there, and now I'm going back to the machine. What it'll do next is that placement line for the main fabric, or your feature fabric. That's what I'm gonna call it. Alrighty, we are back at the machine, and this is gonna be the placement stitch for the feature fabric. And it's not a very big area, but it is enough to where you'll be able to have a decent impact depending on what type of print you're putting in there. Sometimes you might just want to put a solid print in there. Now that part is stitched. I'm going to get my feature fabric and place it in here. I am not going to cut it because I'm trying to save as much of this fabric as I can. But of course, if you decide that you want to cut it so that it's easier for you, by all means, please cut your fabric. But you'll find that I try to save as much as I can. You never know what you can use the scraps for. I'm going to lock that back in place. And we're going to put down the tack down. Sorry for bumping the camera. Okay, so now it is tacked down in place. I'm going to take it off of the machine. I'm going to do the same thing as I did before trimming it, but I know this fabric and it's not going to fray the way the orange did in the background. So I will see you in just a few moments. Alrighty, we have all the extra fabric cleaned up from around the feature fabric. We are now on step 5 of 6 steps. And we are going to stitch the outer satin stitch of the K. I'm going to keep all my colors blue as far as the thread, so there's no thread change. Pressure foot is now down and we're going to hit go. Okay, so you know how I always say do not walk away from your projects when they're running on the embroidery machine. I walked away from my project and I've got to start over. I'm going to show you what happened. Let me get this unhooked here. Okay, so it folded over at some point and it stitched this part that's folded up to the design. That's exactly what you do not want to happen. So I'm going to see if I can save this, and if I can't, I will be starting completely over, and I'll pick up the video once I get to this point again. Okay, so I couldn't save it. So the shirt is ruined, and I'm going to start over again with a different shirt, but I won't record all of that over again. I will pick up at step 5 when I get to that point, and I will resume video. It will be a different color shirt with a different color fabric on it. See you in a minute. Okay, we are back to the machine and we are at step number 5. This is the step where with the previous shirt I messed up because I walked away from the machine and the shirt actually folded down and got stitched into place, and I was not able to save it. So I will not be getting up from my machine at this point, and I am going to make sure that everything stitches the way it's supposed to. This is the longest part of this design. I will not run the camera all the time while it's stitching, but just to let you know, it's going to go through and do a tack down type stitch around the edges, and then it's going to come back and do a satin stitch over everything. Okay, I'll see you in just a minute. Okay, so now we are coming to the end of the stitching of the outer border, which is a satin stitch. And our final stitch will be the satin stitch around the feature fabric. So I'm just going to lower it again and we will stitch that one on out. And I will check back with you when it's done. Alrighty, so it is complete. I'm going to take it out of the hoop, dust it off, and we'll see how it looks.